Never before in history has Mother Earth been under such stress. 7 billion people rely on her for their survival.
Food isn't distributed evenly around the world, so it's not like most of the world will be hungry. The poorest parts of the world will be more hungry than they are now.
1 out of 7 people in the world already are going hungry, and that number is just going to go up.
The fact is that in another 20 years, if there are another 2 billion people coming, we won't have enough land to farm traditionally.
The population is growing at an alarming rate. 4 babies are born every second. That's 360,000 births a day. 1.5 million individuals a week and 130 million people a year.
Today we're up to 7 billion. And in another 20 to 30, maybe 40 years from now, we might add another 2 to 3 billion more people to an already large population. Notice I'm not saying too many people. It's never too many when everybody has enough.
The increase in population that's occurring is going to cause stress all across the board. It's going to result in enormous pressure for food, for instance, at the very time that climate change and extreme weather events are going to make growing food harder and harder.
The climate change that Stephen Schwartz is talking about also has an effect on bees.
About 1/3 of the beehives in the United States, for instance, died off last year.
Colony collapse disorder is such a serious issue that the press describes it as the martyrdom of bees. Although parasites are often blamed, the most likely enemy is humankind and its pesticides. Bees are sentinel species and protectors of the environment. Without them, our meals would no longer be the same.
The important thing to remember, of the 90 foodstuffs that humanity lives on and requires to survive, 70 of them are pollinated by bees. And with the demise of the bees, the whole agricultural cycle is called into question and could collapse. At the same time as our agriculture is collapsing, we are similarly seeing the breakdown of the world's great fisheries, not only because of overfishing, but because the food cycle is breaking down.
Emerging countries experiencing unparalleled growth want to feed their population as they see fit, but farmland is scarce, and the desire for it at any cost causes high speculation and land grabbing.
The capacity of the country itself to produce for its people is insufficient. One way around this is to go to another country, buy land, and begin agricultural production there to directly feed its population. And this is currently taking place on a relatively large scale in some sub-Saharan African countries.
In the early 1960s, the agricultural industry was revolutionized by science with the arrival of chemical fertilizers and new plants. Everything was geared for increased production. This was the Green Revolution.
I think the future in the 21st century, it's not about one green revolution. It's not one technology. It's not the GMOs. It's not an organic culture. I think it's a vast number of green revolutions.
Despite the fact that we have the green movement and the organic food movement, our meat consumption has not fallen off. So improving photosynthesis potentially is a way where we could meet the food needs of the people without giving up meat.
I think the industrial model is the one that's actually productive enough to feed 9 billion people.
Two groups are colliding on this planet that will need to accommodate 9 billion people by the year 2050. the hungry and the overfed. In addition, demographic changes specific to modern life in developed countries question the viability of large-scale agriculture.
We are getting older. We're having less and less children, which means that we are eating less and less, yet we are producing more and more. For example, when we talk about sustainable development, I think we should be more concerned with the phenomenon of food waste.
We have people who live on the edge of poverty, or even extreme poverty. And so just a slight increase in the cost of certain food staples could have terrible consequences.
The already deep gap between developed and third world countries is widening. Poor people spend between 50 to 80% of their income on food. Hunger riots can even be seen in European countries strongly shaken by the economic crisis. Are we heading for a struggle between economic ideology and the stark reality of the malnourished?
If you were to assume right now that 7 billion people had enough, although that's not true because of the maldistribution of the food itself, but we produce enough to feed 7 billion people today.
While the population is growing at an alarming rate, resources are diminishing. How can we find a balance between too much and not enough? How can we reconcile science with the art of agriculture? At a time when humanity is propelling itself towards a major food crisis, scientists are coming up with diverse, inventive solutions to answer the question, how will we feed all these people? We thought we could be masters of the soil and enjoy its seemingly unlimited fruits, but it's now showing signs of depletion. Inconceivable even 10 years ago, the Waterloo Biotron Research Centre in Ontario was set up specifically to help agriculture survive climate change.
Here is one of the 6 biomes that we have, and we can adjust temperature, photo period, in other words, length of a day. The question of rain, we can say that we have 1 millimeter of rain per hour, or we can have a flood and have 3 centimeters in a few minutes. We can even have it rain on one half of the biome, and have dryness or drought on the other half to compare. How the plants react, and at the same time with the CO2, we can have 4 times the normal levels. Imagine we can now ask how this specific variety of tomato will behave under today's climatic conditions. We can even anticipate worse conditions in the year 2050. In this way, we can help agricultural plant producers to foresee whether a variety of plant that we have today will be usable in a few years down the road. And if we see that only 2 to 3% can survive, we at least know that, genetically, this strain is capable of surviving during this period. There are so many components in relation to climate change. We're talking, of course, about temperature, increased CO2, drought. What is the effect on the plant? More CO2? Theoretically, that would bring about more photosynthesis, but if it's dry, it will be stressed. If we can't grow tomatoes now because it's very hot, maybe we can grow lemons.
A mystery remains. How will insects, both helpful and harmful, behave in a future paralyzed by global warming?
We will study the harmful insects and ask the same questions. Do they perform well on a plant that has been grown at a higher temperature, under drier conditions, and higher CO2 levels? Here, we're in the Entomology section, where we have a series of rooms where we can breed the insects under temperature-controlled conditions. We can alter the light, the temperature, the relative humidity, etc. And here what you see is a crop of harmful insects that migrate every year. It's the common armyworm, a harmful insect that attacks corn and grains. And some years they arrive in Canada in low numbers. They come each year, but every 5 years we get a large number that then cause millions of dollars worth of damage. Come autumn, with the shorter days and lower temperatures, they change physiologically. They don't enter into their reproduction phase. They put on a lot of fat and they start migrating. But with climate change, what's going to happen?
Each link in the food chain is connected to keep everything balanced. If you disturb only one of these links, the chain breaks. Whether the food chain is broken by humans or by nature, our unlimited appetites continue to come up against the limited amount of what the Earth can produce. And we are asking it to produce much faster than it is capable of. The Green Revolution helped liberate us from these limitations. It enabled the emergence of GMOs. By reducing them to their acronym, we sometimes forget that they are genetically modified organisms.
The GMO debate is an interesting debate for scientists. The bottom line, I think, is that there is a polarization between the people who are for them and the people who are against them. Those who are for them say, look, we can resolve our production problems because straight from the labs or from our test fields, we can have such incredible yield. Those who are against them say, yes, but be careful. We could be playing with fire. These technologies are making fundamental changes to life. And we don't know yet what the impact might be on human allergies, the changes in animals, insects, bacterial flora.
With its beginnings dating back to the early 1980s, GMO technology is relatively new. One thing that is unanimous in the debate is that they are disruptive. Both those who are for and those against them often rely on unsubstantiated facts about their risks and benefits. Moreover, most grain crops that have been modified to make them more robust come from a handful of biotechnology giants.
The biotechnology industry needs to be democratized a little. We can't deny it. It's controlled by very few players. We are dealing with an oligopoly that makes many farmers uncomfortable. Because if, for example, we buy a license from Monsanto, we're then forced to buy a whole bunch of products, and we're stuck with one company for several years.
GMOs bring their share of complexities. Their use is controversial. The research done in the field is tainted by the conflicts of interest between researchers and the companies that sell them. And the question of bioethics regularly resurfaces.
The possibility of a weed resistance, or so herbicide resistance gene escaping from a GMO is a possibility. So for example, a crop that we grow a lot of, canola, has wild relatives of wild mustard. So it's conceivable that gene then gets transferred into what might be weedy species, and that makes that particular mustard hard to control as a weed in canola. It's a measurable risk, but I don't think it fundamentally destroys biodiversity.
Biotechnology researchers are forever searching for that perfect plant. The one that will grow in the most severe conditions with half as much water under a blazing sun. No insect or disease will hold up against it.
There's always a fascination of making a change and then actually seeing that change have a practical use at the end.
Every plant breeder always selects first for yield. If it doesn't yield well, then we're not going to select it as a variety. The conventional way to improve plants is to make crosses between two parents that have traits that you want combined into one plant. So there are two general classifications of techniques for moving genes into plants to produce transgenic or GMO plants. One relies on a natural genetic engineer, which is a bacterium, which when it infects roots of plants, actually moves DNA into a plant and creates at least a portion of the plant that's transgenic. Another way is simply to use a physical force. We call it biolistics, where you take the gene as an isolated DNA, you coat it onto gold particles, and then you shoot those gold particles into plant tissues.
Once this part has become transgenic, we can then use it to regenerate an entire plant. One that could withstand disease in insects, for example. Genetic engineering is a complex science. It can be looked at as a kind of infinite alphabet. Unlocking the code would allow us to create all the desired words.
All of these letters represent an individual piece of the code of the plant. And if we consider that in something like soybean or common bean, there are hundreds of millions and even billions of these letters that make up the identity of those plants. Before we were able to get this genetic information, we were really only able to look at the plants on the scale of the whole plant. So rather than just taking a look at either 96 or a couple of hundred sequences, we're actually able to just take a sample of a plant and sequence the whole organism that can then be compared to other plants. With newer technology, we can actually sequence hundreds of millions of base pairs simultaneously. We're able to get a snapshot of the whole organism, and that's where things are going next, and that's where things are getting really exciting.
If the first wave of GMOs was designed primarily to feed livestock and humans, the second generation targets the health of the consumer itself.
The Golden Rice Project was really focused on the developing world, where finding a diversity of food is a challenge. This is rice that has high levels of vitamin A, so having adequate levels is there to prevent blindness and so on. The rationale was to provide a basic staple of diets for parts of the world where rice is an important component of that diet. That's a next generation crop which is focused more on the consumer.
GMOs nonetheless continue to spark many other debates.
When I've talked to Muslim students, for example, and asked, are you opposed to producing genetically modified organisms? And the response is no, not. But I said, if the gene that we move into the plant is a pig gene, would you be opposed to GMO? And they would say yes. So this is a decision based not on safety, it's just based on a preference that in that case might be faith-based. Why are people against GMOs is a big, it is a puzzle to somebody who is working in this area and sees primarily advantages. I guess I always thought initially that if people understood, then they would come to accept them. At the moment, the plants that we consume have a 15-year history of safety.
Because rice is responsible for feeding more than half the planet, it is the most pressing grain to modify through biotechnology. We want to do it by converting rice, which is a C3 plant, into a C4 plant, making a rice that would be twice as efficient. The designation C3 comes from the fact that the plant needs 3 carbon molecules to transform its carbohydrate at the time of photosynthesis. The C4 plant has 4 carbon molecules. but it stores its carbohydrate overnight, or until it's ready for photosynthesis in less harsh climate conditions.
In the industrialized world, where we have a very efficient agricultural system, the crops are approaching their peak productive capacity, and the only way to increase their yields ultimately will be to increase their ability to convert sunlight into photosynthesis.
Grains that can produce beyond our usual agricultural performance are part of the C4 photosynthetic system.
Most of the plants that we directly eat in our diet are C3. Most of the C4s that we grow actually go to feeding animals because humans tend not to prefer them. The C4 system includes crops such as maize, sugarcane, the millets. These are the most productive crops we have in the world. The C4s have somewhere between 50% to 300% higher water use efficiency than the C3s. The C4s also, because of their efficiency, for a given unit of protein, which comes from nitrogen, they produce approximately 50 to 100% more biomass. This is rice, which is a C3 plant, and this is sugarcane, which is a very productive C4 plant. And the size difference you see here sort of illustrates well the difference in productivity at this stage of growth that you would have between rice and a C4 rice. Elephant grass, as an example, when it's growing, say, 4, sometimes 5 meters high, will produce upwards of 100 tons per hectare, whereas the peak production in a C3 grass is only approaching 50 tons per hectare.
Whether living or decomposing, plants produce organic matter. It's biomass, a natural fertilizer that's very nutritious for soil.
We'd be able to fertilize our plants with less nitrogen, or for a given amount of nitrogen, you just get a lot more food out of the crops. So in a world that's limited by space, by agricultural land, it's a way of boosting our yields.
Will biotechnology soon be able to transform C3 cultures into C4 cultures?
The true answer is we don't know for sure, but our estimates are probably 15 to 30 years. This is not going to be a simple step. There's probably dozens to hundreds of genes involved in this transformation. It's just moving so many genes at once is a relatively novel capability we hope to develop.
Despite the great promise of C4 rice, critics of genetic engineering will certainly make themselves heard.
Genetic engineering and biotechnology is very controversial. Can we do without it to meet the food needs in the future? Yes, if people give up meat.
Staple foods such as rice, wheat, and corn provide rice dishes, pasta, and bread to all cultures of the world. On the other hand, the appetite for meat has been increasing, both in developed and emerging countries. And this causes additional problems because raising livestock puts even more stress on our already struggling fields.
Making animals more productive has a big impact, because if a cow goes from 4 pounds of grain to produce a pound of beef to 3 pounds, all of a sudden you can produce more meat for the world with less inputs.
Nearly half of the world's grain is used to feed animals, and that has a huge impact on food resources.
One of the most contentious parts of biotechnology is animal biotechnology. And we've seen some interesting forays into animal biotechnology with cloning and also with modifying genes inside things like pigs to actually reduce their impact on the environment. There's one at the University of Guelph called the EnviroPig. The public basically hates this idea. They do not like us mucking around with the genes of animals.
Emerging countries now have the means of producing all types of meats, but farming cattle is a major source of pollution.
Animals produce the majority of greenhouse gases, both from their digestive process, but also from managing the manure. And so if we can use biotechnology to dramatically reduce that, then I think there might be a little more acceptance of that technology. The Chinese are a little different. They recognize that they have a serious problem in terms of feeding their population. They also recognize that they have a very large population in not a very large space. And so if they can reduce the environmental impact of something like hogs, they're interested.
The establishment of a more environmentally sound aquaculture is being considered in several parts of the world. For example, we no longer feed fish with other fish, but rather with plants or insects, and recycle farming water to avoid polluting. At AquaBounty, research focuses on farmed salmon that are genetically modified to grow twice as fast as their free-range counterparts. They do not run the risk of contaminating the natural population and thus reduce overfishing these schools of fish. However, the effects on human beings remain unknown. A more natural solution is to explore hitherto ignored and less appreciated species, like the gray mullet, sea bass, and mackerel. If meat or fish is scarce or even unobtainable for the poor, an original source of protein is hidden in some surprising species.
Insects are eaten in several parts of the world, mostly in Asia, Africa, and South America. In Asia, for example, China is known for eating silkworms. It is a rich food that can contain up to 60% crude protein.
There are approximately 1,700 species of edible insects in the world. The FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, believes that insects will be part of the solution to the rapidly emerging food crisis.
In Africa, people are more likely to eat caterpillars than a more standard protein like beef or some other kind of meat.
Raising insects costs very little, they emit very little methane gas, and they are easy to transport to the market.
Insects have always been considered as a possible protein source of the future. Eating crickets is thought to be more sustainable than eating beef. We're talking about a farm that isn't very big, and they can be raised in large quantities very quickly and transported. Well, they can be easily obtained. We don't need to go to another country to find crickets. We can find them close to us.
From seeding to harvesting, the earth toils to keep up with the demand in order to produce the food that we want more and more of. Soft technologies can perhaps succeed where biotechnology, not always synonymous with healthy soil, might fail. Biochar is a vegetable charcoal that's several thousand years old and has stunning effects on improving soil quality.
Biochar is not a fertilizer as such. We use the word more as a soil enrichment. Plants don't absorb biochar. It's really rather inert in the earth. Biochar interacts a lot with microbes, nutrients, but it stays in place. Here at McGill, we're doing field and greenhouse research on the effects that biochar has on the production of a variety of cultures. We think that by using biochar on the earth, we can reduce the amount of fertilizers that we need to get a given yield.
Biochar is relatively easy to make.
Biochar is made from biomass, or vegetable waste. We take the waste and heat it up. It's a little like cooking it. We heat it up in a closed container. There are also long-term advantages to using biochar, like nutrient retention, for example. They can be retained in the root zones or any zone that has had biochar applied to it.
Over time, studies have shown that biochar has other benefits beyond just soil improvement.
Biochar is very, very porous. It's where the microbes can live. It's also where the biochar can absorb the different contaminants from the soil. It's in our best interest to use biochar in contaminated soils. Even 4 years after a single application, we can still see the benefits of that application. There's no reason to think that the benefits will not remain, perhaps even increase over a period of time, because we know that biochar will be there for centuries or even millennia.
Natural fertilizers, 100% organic grains, and the efforts of the men and women dedicated to nature are the cornerstone of the Guelph Center for Urban Organic Farming.
We're in fact not using any inputs except human energy. We're growing food here at the farm in Guelph without using oil. So we're calling it post-oil and post-water agriculture.
When the price of fuel rises, food prices immediately rise. Biofuel made from corn helps rid us of our dependence on oil, but perversely adds to our agricultural stress because the resource, in addition to having to feed us, must also fulfill our energy needs.
My aim is to grow the best quality food in a most efficient manner with virtually no input so we can actually talk about sustainable farming in the truest sense of the word sustainable, which is a 360. It's the completion of a circle. We are putting in, we're taking out, we're putting it back in. So all of the food crops that come off, all of the waste from those food crops will be returned in the form of nutrient.
Growing organically respects the Earth's natural cycle. In some cases, it's the only way to renew the soil.
Organic farming has the potential to not only feed the world, but restore areas of the world that have degraded their soils, which in fact is a reality. It's like areas of China that are producing foods right now are being maximized to the point where the land has become salty. We can restore that land through organic farming practices.
As more and more seeds are genetically modified, the biggest challenge facing organic farming is to find 100% organic seeds, because organic starts with the seed.
We cannot have a certified organic farm with the use of GMO seed or any product coming into the farm that has been, animals that have been raised with GMO farm feed lot. That manure could not come onto a certified organic farm. We have about 30 varieties of seed that we've saved so far over the last 2 years. So it's certified organic. We need more seed producers, so I'm hoping that we can be one of those.
By increasing the organic farming models in our cities, we could meet our needs for vital foods entirely independently.
I think a farm like this could be replicated and become sort of a prototype in many urban areas. We really do want to promote the idea that we can eat food, local food year-round.
With all the over-packaging at the grocery store, it's difficult to know where our food is coming from. The road from the farm to our plate is full of twists and turns, and it's easy to lose sight of the tomato or the beef that comes from the field or livestock. The sanitized cities that we live in tend to obscure even more the concept of agriculture in the 21st century.
I feel that people don't understand farming and don't understand what farming can do for urban areas. And if, in the Northern Hemisphere, we can eliminate the divide between the rural and urban areas, I feel that people would worry less about the future of agriculture.
The size of a meal served in a restaurant today is 4 times bigger than one served in the 1950s. The green revolution has succeeded in satisfying our endless appetites, even though we rely more on imports to satisfy our needs. Growing locally eliminates our dependence on food imports.
A city like Toronto, there was a study done in 2006 that said if the city were cut off from imports from the United States, within 3 days, its grocery stores would have insufficient food to feed its population. The idea of growing food within a city's borders protects cities from social unrest or cataclysmic weather events that could disrupt food importation.
I think we all need to take more responsibility for feeding ourselves. There's no reason why that we have to import such large quantities of food.
Tearing up the land and raising prices, pushing fields beyond their capacities. These methods must give way to gentler farming. The city has a new calling. In Montreal, Lufa Organic Farms has a vision of a city filled with rooftop farms that grow day and night. Their farm is a 31,000 square foot greenhouse on top of a Montreal office building in Ahuntsic.
There are 2 zones. We divided the greenhouse into 2 parts. Here we have the hotter part, where we grow the eggplants you see here, the tomatoes and the peppers, and we have a colder zone that we've dedicated to lettuce, arugula, or anything that likes cooler temperatures.
A lot of farmers devote themselves to monoculture, the cultivation of a single species crop like the tomato, for example. While it is profitable, this type of farming will deplete the soil over the years. Lufa Farm stands out because of their polyculture. They offer 40 varieties of vegetables to 2,000 Montrealers a year.
Here we have tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, eggplants, lettuce, arugula, bok choy, a little bit of everything, practically 100 herbs. So everything is drip irrigated, and then this water, the excess irrigation water, is recirculated into the ground and filtered and reused. Here in this greenhouse, we use biological control, and we don't use pesticides or herbicides to control the pest problems. So when we find a certain kind of pest, we can introduce a predator that will go eat it. What is also interesting is that we use energy curtains at night that reduce the area of the greenhouse that needs to be heated. So this system cuts the heating needs almost in half. We have a computer system that manages the entire greenhouse. It controls the humidity, the ventilation, the lighting, the energy curtain screens, the heating, and everything. And it's a system that we can control from our iPhone or a laptop from anywhere in the world. So it's a rather technologically advanced greenhouse.
Without pollination, we wouldn't be able to eat fruits or vegetables. At Lufa Farms, they practice assisted pollination with drones. These gather pollen and nectar from twice as many flowers a minute as their unassisted counterparts.
So here we use natural pollination with drones. We have a drone hive that is capable of pollinating this whole area.
Growing a tomato on a city rooftop requires less energy than a tomato grown in the soil outside the city.
Our customers are in a 5 to 10 kilometer radius around our greenhouse, and with our basket system, we deliver in bulk, so we deliver 10 baskets at a time. So a small truck can feed 2,000 people, and it's the only transport we need to bring fresh vegetables directly from the agricultural producer to the consumer.
People who subscribe to Lufa Farms pick up a weekly basket at a distribution point close to their homes. To replenish the baskets and offer the greatest variety possible to its consumers, Lufa Farms depends on organic farmers outside Montreal.
There's almost no transportation involved to bring those vegetables to the consumers. We think we have a much smaller ecological footprint than a producer in Mexico who needs to ship his vegetables from Mexico to here. The most important thing is the fact that the quality of imported produce is never the same as food that is produced locally and is eaten fresh. Mexican tomatoes are often harvested while green and turn red while in transport. So we harvest in the morning, distribute in the afternoon. Like this, we can deliver vegetables that are incredibly fresh and of superior nutritional value and taste very different. We think that farming should be a part of cities. We could become self-sufficient in Montreal. We couldn't grow wheat or corn, but for fresh vegetables, we think that there are enough roof surfaces in Montreal to feed all Montrealers. And it's the same for many other cities as well, like Ottawa, Quebec, Toronto, and other North American cities. Our vision is a vision of a city full of rooftop farms.
The course that I taught in that had as its theme gloom and doom was called medical ecology. It says if you damage the environment, there's a health risk associated with that. They got tired of hearing it. They didn't want to hear that anymore. Although they knew it was true, they would rather work on something uplifting. And that's where the idea about raising food on the rooftops of New York came from. They said, stop, we've heard enough. We can't eat, we can't sleep, we can't drink. We don't even want to stay in college anymore. What's the use? The whole world is falling apart. I said, no, it's not falling apart. It's not falling apart. You can help put it back together. How often does an idea in a classroom ever escape into the real world? People think it's a good idea and they start doing it. How often does that happen?
This is how Dixon Despommier became the world leader in vertical farming.
Even if you think vertical farming is something of a technological breakthrough which has limited application, think of the next 2 billion people and where their food will come from. And you'll see why this idea has credibility with regards to using technology to remove food from the land, to put it into the cities where people are living. When you put all that together, you have the option for an ecologically balanced city. But it requires also the ability to convert waste to energy. When we eat food, we produce urine and feces. What do we do with both of those products? We throw them away. There are a few places in the world that are forward-looking and that see human waste as a usable product. And what's done there is that the liquid waste is converted into two parts, the liquid part, and then there are dissolved solids. The solids are separated and treated separately. In some cases, they dry them down, heat them up to kill all the microbes, and then they make pellets out of them, and they can sell that as fertilizer for traditional farming. But if we were to capture the energy just in the feces that we produce, we could produce enough energy right now to actually supply the grow lights with enough energy to grow our food. Where does the water come from? Where does it go? Where does the food come from? Where does it go? Where does the waste go? And once you've eliminated the word waste, now you're thinking like an ecologist. And I think the next mayor of every city has to be an ecologist.
It's not necessarily a utopian city that will foster vertical farms.
Vertical farms can exist anywhere, in any kind of building. And the reason for that is that the plants only need 2 small wavelengths of light in order to grow. The sun produces a complete spectrum of light, but plants only use 2 narrow sections of that spectrum. If you cut those spectra out and create LED lights to grow the plants, you can grow them anywhere. You can grow them underground, in fact.
At Plant Lab in Holland, the farm is built vertically. This ensures that horizontal fields are unburdened from farming. Organic products are available year-long without concerns for sunlight or extreme climatic events. Even the seeds, 100% organic, are recycled and grown on site.
So why would anyone want a vertical farm in their neighborhood? And the best answer I can give you is 2. One is it supplies employment opportunities for people who need to work. The second reason I would want it in my neighborhood is because I'm right next to where the fresh produce comes from. The bottom of every vertical farm will be a greengrocer. You can go any time of the day or night and buy food that's less than 1 hour old. On my desk for about 30 years, I preserved a little saying that I got from a fortune cookie. And the saying read, "Nothing is impossible to a willing heart." So I think with urban farming, it sounds right. Everybody, oh, that sounds, of course that's what we should be doing. How? How should we do it? Do it any way you can to begin with, and it will evolve from there. But I'm so happy that the world has been attracted to the idea, and many different places are now trying this. And I think it will succeed in some places and it won't succeed in others. Whoever succeeds will share those ideas with others, and I think the world will be a better place because we'll have vertical farms. That's what I think.
Faced with the dwindling of our natural resources, can our behaviors improve our conditions? Degrowth could be an important means in reaching that goal. The concept of consuming less and sharing our resources more is the antithesis of waste. It's not a step backwards, nor would we be abandoning progress, but rather we'd be moving forward positively in a new direction. At Whidbey Island, south on the west coast of the United States, the concept of degrowth is a way of life that has been adopted by the entire community. Researcher Stephen Schwartz has made the island his own living, breathing laboratory.
Part of it is that it's an island, and so everybody's on the island, and it's a sort of isolated area. So it's like a petri dish in a laboratory in a way.
On this island, an experience has taken root in a spirit reminiscent of traditional rural values. It shatters the notion of individualism prevalent in our society.
One of the interesting things about the WIN program is the attitude of the providers concerning the recipients. Most food programs that are government administered treat people as if they were problems, failures. Here on the island, the food programs are successful because they treat people not as failures, but just as neighbors who are going through a hard time.
The WIN program, which stands for Whidbey Island Nourishes, was started with very little means and a lot of generosity.
Several women here on the island saw that children were not eating properly, children whose families were in food distress. They started a program where they send the children home on the weekends with 2 grocery bags, really enough to feed several people. For the teenagers, WIN established a series of free vending machines, and these are spaced around the island and are policed by the teenagers themselves. They see that abuse doesn't occur.
It's a fridge where, like, if people who don't have enough money for lunches for kids and like stuff, they can go back there and get a lunch for free, and it's open like 24 hours a day.
The WIN program is just one of a whole series. We have a nonprofit grocery store. We have the Good Cheer Food Bank, which has a series of community gardens where healthy vegetables are grown without use of pesticides or insecticides.
The Good Cheer Bank is based on a point system where it's to your advantage to get organic fruits and vegetables instead of junk food. For example, junk food is in the red zone where only one item can be put in your basket, whereas organic produce is free and only costs 1 point. On Whidbey Island, there's also a communal coffee shop that teaches teens the basics of sharing.
It's a nonprofit organization meant to bring the community together, and people of all ages can volunteer, and it's also another way for teenagers to get work experience. It's more like community-based, like everyone knows everyone, so it's like close-knit community.
There is, in fact, an entire network of these food programs, all of them interlocked, started and run by citizens who mostly know each other. When their lot improves, many of the recipients become workers and volunteers in the programs. I think the idea of A, treating people with dignity, and B, as citizen-created programs in which both recipients and providers know each other and are friendly, could be adopted elsewhere to an enormous success. I think this is the future.